Hi, everybody. So thanks for joining our first Lunch and Learn. As is customary for these, we hit just about every single technical roadblock that we possibly could. This Lunch and Learn session is the first in a whole series of them that we're doing over summer. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the Q&A function is not available, which is really, really annoying, which means you can't ask us any questions through this. What I will do is I'll somehow set something up so that we can have like a user group forum for some Q&A, and you can reach us through Meetup, but rather annoyingly, Teams isn't playing ball today. These Lunch and Learn sessions are going to be very sort of free-flowing, not slides. They're just, very, very great ways for people who are really immersed in certain products to just talk about those products and do it all through demos rather than slideware. So today I'm joined by Theo and Pablo, and Pablo and I have just put together like a we're going to go through almost like have a pseudo Q&A so that I can tease out some of the best approaches and patterns and practices from Theo and Pablo. So Pablo, do you want to share your screen, and we'll just have like an open mic now where we'll talk through Purview, patterns and practices, enterprise deployments, and how-tos.
Yep. Let me share my screen. I'm going to go over how. Let me come to Purview. I'm going to go over how we have set up this Purview instance. You can set up your own Purview instance quite easily in a couple of minutes, depending on what level of enterprise setup do you have. But in general,
Pablo, just for the people that have never used Purview, just give like a 30-second pitch as if you were someone from Microsoft on what it does and why you should be using it now if you have a data estate.
Yeah, so Microsoft is positioning Purview as the data governance tools in Azure. It's growing really fast. They has been adding lots of sources. I started working with it. You can see all the sources it can track, and at the moment, it's a really powerful catalog. So I'm going to go over the interface, but you basically have a search functionality, and you can search over all the assets you have. Purview automatically detects all those assets in Azure. Picks those assets, it has classification. So right now we have a really simple classification for this dataset, that is the age of the individual, but you have many, many more classifications related to PIA or others, and you can even have your own classifications. So in the end, you build your own catalog for all the assets you have. This catalog, you can enrich it afterwards using glossaries and your own business terms. And in the future, more features will come from Microsoft. As I mentioned, they are positioning it as their data governance tool. At the moment, this is a really useful catalog where you can have all your data state, and you can afterwards, using APIs, use that information in other services, for example. It also gives you a map view of all the sources. Right now it's only a blob storage, but you can build really complex sources here when you have different resource groups and subscriptions all tied together to this catalog. And you can have a quick view of everything, discover assets that way.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that if I didn't like the look of the catalog, I could use APIs to build my own. Can you talk us through how you might do that?
Yep. So Purview has different APIs. So as I mentioned, you have these that are the sources. The the sources are the physical resources. So, for example, let me show you. This is a web storage, and if I come here, these are the scans. And you can set up different scans. If I click Edit Scan, this is using right now Purview MSI. It's scanning everything, but you can actually filter what you want to scan depending on the file type or other rules. You can define your own rules. So using those APIs, so you have APIs to manage basically everything in Purview. APIs to manage these sources, so you can integrate with automated deployment systems and automatically add things to the source map to be tracked by Purview. And you also have APIs to extract information, the metadata that Purview contains related to assets. So, for example, here we have a storage account, this one, and we have this information, this dataset about COVID data, and we have the properties here, the last modified, the blob type, etc., and the schema. And in the schema, one of the really powerful things that Purview has is this classification. So right now it only classified that this is age of an individual, but we can extract this information and use it in some other places. For example, we can track if we have PA data in a dataset that we missed at some point. We can use the APIs for that.
Yeah, that's all pretty smart. So it basically scans and it types the columns based on the type. How does it profile that? How does it sample that?
Yeah. So these are called classifications. I think it's worth stopping a few seconds. So we have classification, sensitivity, labeling, and glossary terms. These are the three ways Purview has of labeling your tables and columns. The simplest ones are classifications, that are the ones that are automatically done by Purview and normally are done based on the content of the columns. Glossary terms are the business terms that you have. So if you want to apply the meaning that a column has for you, you can apply those in the glossary terms. And sensitivity labeling is integration with the Office 365 compliance, security and compliance labels. So you can have these columns labeled automatically, or if they had some label at the source, they will be picked by Purview. And about how you define your own classification, so you have here in the management tab, you have the classifications. These are all the classifications that Microsoft has. In the documentation, you have specifically how they are picking this and how they build these labels. So these are MIP labels, Microsoft Information Protection, I think it is. So this translate to those MIP labels, and you have the documentation about how they pick this. Microsoft is still growing this, so over time they will get more labels here, and all these are automatically classified. So if I click in one of these, we can get the instances. They even have version. So right now this is a new instance and you won't get this, but if there is a new version of this label, you will get here an update, and you can click update to update the rule. The way this classification works is you can see match percentage. So we don't have this because this didn't have any. Let me see if I can find the age one. It isn't showing at the moment. We ran the scan just a few minutes ago. But the thing is that these classifications are, what they do is they sample a percentage of your file, of your data, and they apply the rules. So the rules can be, if I try to create a custom rule, no custom rule, so classification rules. If I try to apply a custom classification rule, you will see that they can be regular expressions, dictionary, that are exact words. The system ones actually apply some statistical analysis also. So the ones that you create customly, they need to have, they are really simple. But the ones that Microsoft does, they have their own statistic way of applying those. All that can be, so they have in the documentation, they have all this documented. So if you are curious to see how they are doing this.
That's pretty smart. Do you know whether Microsoft are going to open that statistical framework up to customized use in the future? What's your view?
So they mentioned that they are going to extend it further, but for now, the only way you can use it inside Purview is using the regular expressions. In the security and compliance portal, you have more tools to use those MIP labels. As far as I know, there is there might be in the future some work in progress to integrate those. So since Microsoft is trying to position this as the data governance tool, they will try to tie all the security to Purview.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, great. So we've got a scan which has yielded a lot of different columns of data, and it also classified one, I saw.
Yep. So if I come back here, we will see we have the classification. I wanted to try to just before the call, I was generating here a dataset with this tool. So I was adding names, phone, email, date, city, just to create a simple dataset. So if I do generating page, just as a quick demo, so you will see that we get this kind of dataset. I was going to actually upload that here, and let's see what Purview is picking up in this one. Let me move this. I don't know if it is loaded. Yeah, I think this one is here. Let's trigger a scan and let's continue while it is scanning, just to show you how it works. So here you have the sources. For each sources, you can have multiple scans. It depends. So there are scans that are able to scan multiple type of resources. For example, you can have resource group scan. And for those, you might have an scan for ADLS and a scan for databases, different scans with different rules. For now, I'm just going to trigger an incremental scan, and this will now go over the assets that we have in data storage account and try to find anything new. This will take a couple of minutes. The previous one was 5 minutes. So while it runs, what this will do is it will pick that data and classify it, and we will be able to now see it under here once it's done. So I think a little bit more on the information that we have here. So on the columns, we have properties that is basically metadata on the file. Everything is picked up by Purview by default. We have the schema, that is the something that you can do is you can apply your own classification. So as I showed, you can create your own rules and your own classification. So you might want to apply a custom classification here. Same with glossaries. We don't have any now, but if you created your own glossaries because you want to apply a custom meaning to continent, for example, you can apply this glossary here. Fix any other kind of information and descriptions, etc. Lineage is another tab. Lineage is to track how the different datasets, the information is, the data is flowing. Right now, Purview has integration with ADF. Here, you can add your own ADF instances, click in new, and it will track all the copy activities and data flows. At the moment, it's only that, copy activities and data flows, but it will keep growing once more activities are supported and sources. While this goes, let me see. it's still queue.
So one thing I'm curious about, Pablo, is how does it discover patterns? So let's say you have multiple directories of the same files and same schema. How does it represent all of that? I know that we haven't set up a test harness for this, but I'm curious. Most people are going to have like time-bound folders, for example.
Yeah. So the way it works is in the fully qualified name. For example, if it is a Spark file, something like Delta or a Parquet, you will see that this is the folder name slash the dataset name, that is basically the containing folder, and then you will see brackets and Spark partitions. Those brackets it uses to define patterns, so it can detect patterns for year, month, date, the usual date partitioning. It can identify patterns for numbers. So, for example, if you have something like UID, it will detect those and say, okay, this is a UID that you have. Also, if you have your Parquet files partitioned by a column, it will tell you the column here on the fully qualified name. So even if it is multiple files, it automatically detects those patterns and it compacts everything in a single dataset.
Okay, right. That's pretty smart. So there's a lot going on under the scenes, even though even though it's being represented, it's not like overrepresented. It's it will pick up the patterns and things like that.
Yeah. So the idea is that
most companies are going to be managing.
Yeah. So the idea is that it will have a simple view of your data. So you don't want to have a lot of files. You will get, for example, on this one, and you can filter by resource set. I think this one is a resource set. Is a file. I didn't pick the right one. So you can see this is a block path. So you can filter by these ones. If you have a Parquet is defined as a resource set by the type. So this is the internal. So Purview internally uses Apache Atlas APIs, and the model it has internally is really similar to Apache Atlas. In Apache Atlas, you have resource set, you have the model, and the model for Parquet and other more complex types than a simple CSV is resource set. This one, since it is a CSV, is much more simpler.
Perfect. You mentioned APIs, and I know that that Apache Atlas is a core part of this, and that it's Apache Atlas compliant. You, both yourself and Theo, built your own SDK because there was some gaps in what Microsoft were offering. Could both of you talk me through what you did and why you built it?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, everything in Purview is based on APIs. So let me see here. If I go to the to the network tab, this is a bit of code, but if I click here, for example, edit, you will see that this is calling these APIs, and you will see here the APIs. Let me open this a bit more. So this is calling the API, the storage account .scan. This is the scans API, and this is the REST API it is tracking. So you can see here data sources and my data source, and this is the get method. And if you preview the data, you can see the response here. So this is all the information Purview has. So you can use this same API call. So if now I did apply, it will do a put request. You can see the body here. So we use this to basically reverse engineer these APIs. So we are able to do everything Microsoft is doing. So Microsoft is still preparing those APIs and the SDKs. I think it has already, it has some information in their documentation, but at the moment it's really simple, and they don't document all the things that Purview can do. But using this way, you can see what Purview is doing behind the scenes, and you can. It's a standard Microsoft REST API, so you can do the same that Purview is doing, but in a script, for example, using a CI/CD. So the way we have set up this, we have some pipelines in ADO. We use those pipelines to automatically deploy resources once they are ready. For example, you have a non template that is deploying the resource, and then another task that is adding those resources to Purview. That way you never lose those resources.
Oh wow, that's pretty interesting. And obviously, you and Theo filled a gap. Is it looking like Microsoft is going to back up that API functionality that you've already built?
Yep. Yeah. So Microsoft is on the works of publishing their APIs. They already have some clients. It's just that they are not very well documented. So as an example, if I was looking at this scans API to create a new resource, the problem that the documentation that Microsoft has at the moment is that they say, okay, we have an endpoint that is create a resource, but it doesn't document the actual schema that you need to have in the body, because this create resource is a standard for all the type of resource, but each resource has its own body. So for blob storage, you have endpoint, location, resource group, resource name, subscription ID, but for a database, you have server name, database, and others.
Got you. Okay. I think I can see the moral of the story here, which is that if you need something, and you can either wait for Microsoft to deliver it to you, if it's an API, or you can build it yourself. And I'm a big fan of the latter. Before, in the old days, even before the Azure Resource Manager in classic Azure, I built a management SDK called Fluent Management, and I went and reverse engineered a lot of the APIs for all of the services before that they were commonly available, and I wrapped them up into a C# framework, and it went across the internet like wildfire, and a lot of people, like tens of thousands of users, were automating VMs and web roles and worker roles and storage accounts and all these kind of things. So I think the moral of the story from looking at what you and Theo have done is, if you need something, don't be impeded and wait. Release it, it's their timeline, but you know, just work out and reverse engineer how these things work from the portal. So I mean, that's great. That's fantastic that you've managed to do that.
Yeah, and you can basically control all that you can do in the interface. You can do with these APIs, and even there are some functionalities that aren't available on the UI for some reason. You can do those using the APIs. As an example, when you set up a scan, so for example, let me just set up a scan. Maybe they have changed this, so they are changing the UI a lot, so this might be changed now. But when we were trying to set up, yeah, so you can see that you can only set this for one day of the week. If you use the APIs, you can set this up for multiple days of the week. This might be an oversight from Microsoft on the UI side, but
yeah. Phenomenal. And I guess you can always build your own UI now. So
yeah, exactly.
that exposes these days of the week.
Yeah, so if you need a complex schedule, because this is really simple, so every day of the week at this time, but if you need to trigger scans based on some other logic, you can build your own Azure function, for example, and run these scans based on your own logic.
Beautiful. So I have one question. I'm going to throw it to you and Theo. Theo hasn't said very much so far, so I just want like a really sort of open-ended judgment. This is a judgment question. If you look at Purview from the top down, where do you both see there are gaps in the product compared to other data governance tools that you've seen, or things that you think might be missing and Microsoft should think about?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So I think possibly the biggest gap from our point of view right now is the access controls related to people using the catalog. So at the moment, there's just three data plane roles that can be given to users, and those are the reader role, the curator role, and the administrator role. So a reader can just see everything in the catalog and not manipulate it, and a curator role can then make changes in the catalog but can't set up scans and register new sources, and then the final role allows you to do scans and register new sources. And so at the moment, if you have the reader role, you can literally see everything in the catalog, and there's no way of restricting that access. Whereas something that Microsoft are working on, and something that we're pushing them hard to provide, is that fine-grained access to control to say, hey, you're this kind of user, you have this role, you're allowed to manipulate these assets, but you don't have access to see and manipulate other assets. So that's one of the gaps there are right now, but it's something that Microsoft realizes essential, and they're working hard to provide it.
Interesting. And I remember when we set this up, Pablo was adding himself to various data curator roles. But yeah, it's interesting that there's only 3 roles, so they're not fine-grained enough. Anything else generally that we think is a gap?
Yeah, so we have found that the approach that Microsoft has taken here is really simplistic. So you give everyone access to everything, so those finer grain roles, and also more workflow control. So at the moment, if you are a data curator, you can basically create any glossary. And we found that with really big and complex catalog, where you have different business domains that you need to segregate, having more control about who is able to create glossaries for which domain, and who is able to approve those glossaries. Those are some of the things that the enterprise is looking for. At the moment, Purview doesn't have those.
Got you. One thing that I noticed is that when you scan that small file, Pablo, it did take a while to initialize. Do you have any experience of the performance of Purview?
So normally it takes a while to initialize for the because it is using the auto-resolve integration runtime, and it needs to pick up one of those. It's actually quite performant. I have been surprised about how much information it has been able to scan, because the process it is sampling the data. So even if you have terabytes of data, normally it doesn't read everything. It reads a part of the data and processes it. So I have seen datasets with terabytes of data being processed in minutes. So I think it's a matter of, this is the overhead of starting, and afterwards this takes just a few minutes in general. There are others, so for some of the Purview instances we have, we needed to use integration runtimes because they were behind private endpoints in a virtual network. For those, the scans did take longer. The longest one I have seen is, I think, 12 hours for a Synapse data warehouse. But I think that was more related to the integration runtime we were using.
Okay, interesting. Speaking about integration runtimes and when you're operating on VNets, can you have similar patterns, like multiple integration runtimes, like you can have with ADF?
Yeah. So integration runtimes work the same, as more or less the same as ADF. They even use the same integration runtime software. So if I create here an integration runtime, let me go ahead. You get the same, basically the same menu as an ADF. So you can download and install the integration runtime. These are your authentication keys. So you can connect to this integration runtime. And the only thing that is different is that you cannot share integration runtimes from Purview. So you cannot have an integration runtime from ADF and use it in Purview. And at the moment, you cannot have multiple Purview instances sharing the same integration runtime. But aside from that, they work the exact same way.
Got you. That's all pretty interesting. So, so I guess a lot of excuse me, a lot of enterprises would be using that functionality and scanning off of integration runtime, which I guess are just like ADF, agents on virtual machines.
Yeah, basically they have their own runtime. It's used to connect to the inside the virtual network to the different sources. One of the things that is important to understand with Purview is that Purview doesn't store the data itself. So even if you have PIA data, Purview isn't storing that. So it is not a concern if you're using an integration runtime. So the way that Microsoft recommends to isolate the traffic is if you have your own virtual network with your private endpoints and integration runtime, then and then the data won't go onto Purview, only the metadata. So we know that there's this column that has I don't know, emails, but you won't get any actual emails here in Purview.
Interesting. Yeah, I was even gonna ask about that because I remember in Data Catalog V1, this idea that when you search the catalog, you ended up with samples, and that sample set. So how would that be dealt with?
So at the moment, that's not available in Purview. So I'm not sure if there is. Maybe once they have a better and less. This is the dataset they created. Maybe once they have more controls on the access, they might have this preview, and only those who have actual access to the data will be able to see those. But at the moment, this is what you get. So for Parquet files, for example, you get a sample path. So you get the path of a single file, so you can open those somewhere else if you have access, but you don't get the actual sample of data here.
Okay, good. And I think that, especially given that some of this data is PII data, it's probably better to incorporate, for Microsoft to incorporate this later until the viewing of that data is locked down enough to make sure that people who aren't supposed to see the samples but are okay to see the metadata and otherwise can see the sample data itself. So yeah, I totally understand that. So I mean, I'll sort of leave. I'll push you guys because unfortunately I had tried to the Q&A feature on Teams has failed on this one, so we can't get any external questions. But one of the things that I just wanted to ask, and we've got a few more minutes to discuss this before we close this down, and I'll throw this out to both of you. It seems to me that the intent of Purview is to make this the center point of your data strategy. Could you talk through any patterns and practices that you could potentially put in place, and how you would set this up and use it, and based on what you know and understand of the roadmap, but you might not be able to talk about, just like a very, very general approach as to how you would use this in the enterprise?
Yeah, so Microsoft have made it really easy to set up Purview. So at the moment, it doesn't have that many features aside from Purview, so you cannot apply roles using Purview to the actual resources that will need to be managed outside from there. But what they have made is really simple to set it up. So when Microsoft begin releasing those features in the future, you can you will already have your own Purview instance with all the data there, so you won't have to go over the work again of setting up everything. I think I mentioned that we have done for other instances that we have CI/CD pipelines that automatically register the sources, but depending on your setup, you might also have this that is multiple Azure resources. So with this, you can just select a subscription and it will try to scan everything on the subscription. It depends on the kind of setup you have. So if you have this, then it is basically, and you have the scan schedule. So it is I don't know, you set this up and you can forget about the configuration because everything will be managed by Purview itself. And once new features begin coming, they will be automatically in Purview. And in the meantime, you can use this catalog to search your data state because everything will be here to check for those automatic classifications. And you can begin building your own business glossaries. So this is something that we have not touched a lot, but you can have your own business terms. So you can create here business terms with your own definition. It can have a hierarchy and synonyms, and then you can tag this to the dataset. And they have made it really simple, so you can start building your data catalog. So when new governance features come into Purview, you will already have the catalog with all the data built.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And I just want to take a quick backward step just to make sure that I understood where this was going, because if it's what I think it is, it would be an absolutely amazing feature. But when you said that you could use the Azure subscription feature to scan all of the data sources within a particular Azure subscription, do you think that Purview would ever handle that, managed identity, viewing, access control, service endpoints, these sorts of things inevitably, or would you still have to go through the process of manually making Purview's MI have access to all of these things? What's your view of the long term?
Yeah, I don't see why not. They have done it for other sources where you basically can, if you have enough permission yourself, you can select one of the subscriptions, and it will automatically register itself as a reader. That is the role it needs. That's also already happening for other resources, and at some point that will happen here. New security controls are coming to Azure in the future, and once those are in place, I would say that Purview will begin picking those new controls to be able to control access to the different sources. So at the moment, it's a really powerful catalog, but it will be more in the future.
I'll weigh in here and say that I think one of the things we haven't covered and is one of the most advantageous features of Purview is that it's not limited to just the Azure cloud. They're marketing it as a complete multi-cloud product, which with more and more businesses choosing to use multiple and trying to get the best of both worlds, that can be such a key point. And as Pablo is showing here, these are the sources supported by Purview out of the box at the moment, and with things like S3 and AWS, and then kind of they're working on even cloud agnostic tools like Snowflake, and they're adding to this list all the time, and it's moving incredibly quickly with an Azure prioritization, obviously, but they are working hard on Google Cloud support, AWS support, etc. And that's something that is going to be really, really important to small and large businesses.
Oh, that sounds super useful. There are a lot of users of multiple clouds, especially in the enterprise, and also, to have this be a catalog capability, even though it sits on Azure and You know, whereas companies are like wholly deployed to AWS, but decide to use this as their catalog. It's a really interesting concept, I think. So yeah, it'd be nice to see how this evolves and more and more sources are added. Fantastic. Well, listen, we're pretty much on time. I think it's been like a really fantastic run through. So thank you very much, Pablo and Theo. I think that you know, we got a very sort of quick view of Purview, no slides. My only regret is that Teams failed us and we didn't get the Q&A. So none of you got to ask any questions, but what I'm going to do is set up a user group forum topic on this specifically, and I'll send out an email, and Pablo and Theo will just be able to answer any of your questions on that. So thank you very much for attending. We're running another Lunch and Learn in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to be talking about Azure Synapse Link then. Always on the lookout for any interesting content, how you use services. If you want to also contribute and run a Lunch and Learn session for UK Azure. So with that, I'm going to close this meeting down. The recording will be on a YouTube channel, and I'll send out in a post in an email. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.